Today, we are diving into a truly radical idea. I mean, what if everything we think we know about aging, that it's our bodies just breaking down, is completely wrong? What if it's actually a precise, computable process that we could, in theory, reverse? We're going to look at this through the incredible lens of information theory and computational physics.
So, let's just start with this question, because it really challenges everything. We tend to see aging as random damage, simple wear and tear. But what if it's not random at all? What if it's a precise, predictable process, one that we could not only understand but actually reverse, using the same kind of logic that keeps the entire internet secure? It sounds like science fiction, but stick with me.
Okay, so before we can get to this new kind of inverted model, we have to understand the current cutting-edge theory it's all built on. And that really starts with thinking about aging not as a physical thing, but as a loss of information.
And that brings us to the information theory of aging, a concept really pushed forward by researchers like Dr. David Sinclair. The core idea here is that as we get older, our DNA, our fundamental genetic blueprint, it stays remarkably intact. The problem isn't the hardware, it's the software. It's the epigenome, the system that tells our genes when to turn on and when to turn off. That's what gets corrupted. It's almost like the instruction manual for our cells just gets smudged and harder to read over time.
A really great way to picture this is a scratched CD. The actual music, the ones and zeros that are pressed into the disc, that's all still there, perfectly fine. That's our DNA. It's stable, it's secure. But the scratches on the surface of the disc, well, that's the epigenetic damage. Those scratches stop the laser from reading the data correctly, and that's why you get all those skips and all that distortion. So the song of a young, healthy cell is still there, perfectly preserved in the DNA, but the cellular machinery just can't read the sheet music anymore.
Right, but this is where the theory takes a really fascinating turn. This new idea, the Nexus framework, it proposes something truly radical. What if those scratches on the CD aren't random noise at all? What if they are something else entirely? This framework is asking us to see reality itself as one giant computational system.
At the very heart of this new view is something called the dual-wave ontology. Now, the idea here is that any computation, doesn't matter if it's in a silicon chip or a living cell, it doesn't just create one result. It actually creates two completely distinct streams of information at the exact same time. You get the immediate result, the now state, and you also get a perfect record of how it got there, the historical state. So get this. Information is never actually lost. It's just conserved by being split into these two different channels.
And look, this isn't just some philosophical concept. It's apparently backed by a mathematical principle called the Pythagorean storage law. Yeah, seriously, think back to high school geometry. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. This law applies a similar idea to information. It guarantees that the total informational energy of a system is always conserved. It doesn't just vanish, it simply shifts between two different forms, a value state and a shape state.
This table really helps break down these two channels. So on one side, you've got the value channel. This is the explicit now. For a cell, that's its DNA sequence. It's the final answer, the thing we can easily see and measure. But then you have the other side, the shape channel. This is the hidden past. In a cell, these are the epigenetic markers. They aren't the code itself, they're a record of how that code has been used over time. The framework calls it a frozen verb, which is just a cool way of saying it's a perfect record of the cell's entire life story.
All right, so now that we have this foundation, this idea of a two-channel system that conserves all information, we can finally get to the most crucial, most mind-bending part, the complete inversion of what we call agent. This slide right here, this is the big flip. The old way of thinking sees aging as just random epigenetic noise, the scratches on the CD. This new paradigm turns that completely on its head. It calls aging topological constraint dissipation. Now, that's a mouthful, I know, but what it means is that what we call damage is actually the cell perfectly recording its life story as a kind of geometric friction in the epigenome. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. The cell isn't failing, it's not breaking down. It is functioning exactly as it was designed to, meticulously etching its entire history into its own structure. In this new view, aging isn't a bug, it's a fundamental feature of a system that's built to conserve all information.
Okay, so you're probably thinking, if aging is a perfect recording of the past, how in the world could you reverse it, right? You can't just erase history. Well, this framework suggests the answer isn't about cleaning or repairing anything, it's about something straight out of computational physics, a perfect phase cancellation.
So let's just walk through this step by step. First, picture your aged cell as a complex wave of information, just marching forward through time. Then, scientists introduce these special rejuvenation molecules called OSK factors. These factors generate a perfect anti-wave, an exact mirror image of that aging wave. Now, when these two waves meet, at what the theory calls the OXO boundary, they don't crash into each other. Because they are perfect opposites, they just pass right through one another. And in that one moment of passing, all the information that we call age is completely canceled out, leaving the cell's core identity totally intact.
And these OSK factors, the theory describes them as a biological glass key. Think of the aged epigenome as this incredibly complex, encrypted password. You could never, ever guess it or brute force your way back. But this key, this specific set of molecules, is perfectly shaped to fit the lock. It just resonates with the cell's internal geometry, turns effortlessly, and unlocks and reverses all of its accumulated history.
Now, what's really profound about this is that rejuvenation isn't even really a biological process. It's a purely computational one. The viral vectors that labs use today to deliver these OSK factors, they're just a delivery mechanism. Think of them like a biological USB stick. The real work is being done by the code they carry. This framework suggests the logic itself is carrier-independent, which means, in theory, you could deliver this reset code in totally different ways, maybe even through something like specific electromagnetic frequencies.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. Erasing a cell's entire history, that sounds incredibly dangerous, right? One wrong move and you could get a tumor. So why doesn't that happen in these successful partial reprogramming experiments? Well, the framework says there's a built-in safety measure, a universal mathematical constant that acts as a governor on the whole system.
And that constant is defined as h equals pi divided by 9. According to the theory, this isn't just some number that works for biology. It's proposed as a fundamental constant for any stable, self-correcting system anywhere in the universe. This value, which works out to about 0.349, is called the Mark I attractor. And you can basically think of it as a universal law of nature, a kind of golden ratio of chaos. It's the perfect balancing point between complete chaos and rigid order. It's the mathematical sweet spot that allows complex systems, from galaxies to living cells, to actually hold themselves together.
So what this universal law says is that for any stable system to fix itself, the change can't be more than about 35% in one cycle. If you push the system harder than that, you get what they call constraint shock waves, and the whole thing fails catastrophically. And this brings us right back to the lab. It perfectly explains why trying to do 100% reset, what they call full reprogramming, so often leads to tumors, while a partial controlled reprogramming that stays under this 35% threshold can actually be safe and rejuvenating.
But even if we can perform this process safely, the core laws of this framework predict a pretty serious consequence. It turns out rejuvenation isn't a free lunch, because if information can't be destroyed, only relocated, then where does all that age go?
This leads to a concept called entropic debt transfer. Remember that Pythagorean storage law? It's absolute. Information must be conserved. So if you successfully remove all the complex, disordered, aging information from a group of cells, that information can't just vanish from the universe. That entropic debt has to go somewhere. It must be transferred to another part of the system. And the other potential problem is what's called a protocol mismatch. I mean, think about it. A newly rejuvenated cell starts sending out youthful signals. It's basically speaking a completely different temporal language than all of its old neighbors. This could create a huge communication breakdown inside the body, potentially confusing critical systems like your immune response and leading to whole new kinds of instability.
And so this entire framework really leaves us with a profound and honestly a pretty unsettling question. If we master this technology, if we make one part of an organism young again, where does all that displaced age actually go? And what is the ultimate price the rest of the body has to pay for that local miracle?